Welcome to The Witch's Tales, where you will be immersed in stories of mystery, magic, and drama. Prepare yourself to face unexplained mysteries, bizarre phenomena, and strange adventures that will keep you glued to your eyes. With a captivating voice, we will take you into the world of thrilling stories, where truth and legend collide, making you wonder if everything is really just fiction. When the unseen watches you, a silent conversation with fear. There was something off about the mirror on the wall of my workshop. It wasn't the weight of it against the plaster or the slight tilt that needed fixing. No, it was something much subtler. The glass itself seemed wrong. There was a distortion almost imperceptible, and every time I moved away, my reflection lingered for just a fraction of a second longer than it should. I've worked with hundreds of mirrors in my 20 years as an antique restoration expert, and each one had its own peculiarities. But this mirror, a 16th century piece with a blackened silver backing and an intricately carved wooden frame depicting twisted vines and distorted faces, was different. It wasn't just the craftsmanship, it was something deeper, something watching, something waiting. I had acquired it during my annual buying trip to Europe from an estate sale just outside Venice. The elderly seller had practically shoved it into my hands, accepting only a fraction of its true value. His eyes were nervous, avoiding mine, his hands trembling as he practically begged me to take it. Even then, I knew it was something rare, a genuine Cinquecento artifact from the peak of Venetian craftsmanship. It had its damage, though. Sections of the carved frame rotted away, the glass clouded with centuries of grime, and the tarnished backing was nearly opaque. It wasn't a quick fix, but I've handled tougher restoration jobs. That's what I told myself at the time anyway. My workshop occupies the entire basement of my Victorian house in coastal Maine. It's a solitary space which suits me just fine, especially since my divorce 3 years ago. I dove into my work, losing myself in the methodical process of restoring antiques, the careful cleaning, the attention to detail, the resurrection of forgotten beauty. It became my escape, a way to find meaning in an otherwise empty world. Most of my clients are wealthy collectors or museums, all of them valuing my meticulous approach and my refusal to work with assistance or interruptions. It's a one-man job, and that's how I like it. I began the restoration like any other, starting with detailed photos, a careful inspection, and then diving into research to understand the specific techniques used in the 16th century. This mirror, though, would need more than just careful cleaning. The glass required delicate treatment, the wooden frame needed attention, and the tarnished silver backing had to be repaired. I estimated it would take me 3 weeks, and I had plans to showcase it at a prestigious antique event in the following month. But then the first strange occurrence took place on day 3. I was cleaning the glass with a special solvent when I noticed something unsettling. My reflection blinked a fraction of a second after I did. I thought it was just the light playing tricks on me, or perhaps eye strain after hours of intricate work. But then it happened again and again, each time with an almost imperceptible lag. It was like the reflection wasn't mimicking my movements, but reacting to them. My heart skipped a beat. The adrenaline surged, familiar from past discoveries in my career, like the time I uncovered a rare Chippendale secretary hidden beneath layers of paint. But this felt different, like something was off. I set down my cleaning cloth, raised my right hand, and watched. In the mirror, my reflection followed, but there was a slight delay, barely a fraction of a second. I snapped my fingers. The sound hit my ears before the reflection's hand completed the motion. I tried to dismiss it. It must have been something to do with the age of the glass. Venetian glassmakers were known for their experimental techniques. Maybe this was an example of their craft that had unusual properties. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the lag only became more noticeable. By the end of the first week, the delay had stretched to almost 2 seconds. I'd turn away, and the reflection would stay still, slowly catching up, as though it were following my actions instead of reflecting them. I'd scratch my beard, and the reflection would wait a beat, then mimic the movement with eerie precision. The longer this went on, the more unsettling it became. That night, I began to dream of the mirror. In these dreams, I was inside it, looking out at myself, trapped behind the glass. I woke up in a cold sweat, disoriented heart, racing. My face distorted. Pleading haunted me behind my closed eyelids. As the second week rolled on, I continued working on the frame, but now something else was happening. I noticed that my reflection was fixated on my hands, watching them, with a level of intensity I couldn't match. Every time I glanced up, startled, my reflection wouldn't meet my eyes right away. When it finally did, its expression wasn't one of confusion, like mine, but concern. It looked almost desperate, as though it was trying to tell me something. I approached the mirror slowly, heart pounding, my hands shaking as I raised a tentative hand to wave. But my reflection didn't wave back. Instead, it shook its head, slow and deliberate, then pointed toward the section of the frame I had been working on. The movement sent a cold shiver through me. I stumbled back, knocking over a tray of restoration tools. The sound of the clattering tools echoed through the basement, but my gaze was fixed on the glass. In the mirror, my reflection now seemed to be writing something in the air, frantic, desperate movements that I could feel in my gut, but couldn't fully comprehend. What was going on? Should I cover the mirror? Call someone, anyone, a colleague, a doctor? Instead, I did the last thing I should have. I grabbed a notepad and a pencil. My reflection nodded vigorously, its movements completely independent of mine. My hands were sweating, my heart racing as I stared in horror at the messages my reflection was writing in thin air, backward but legible if I concentrated hard enough. What it wrote was nothing short of chilling. The mirror had been created by Vincenzo Barozzi, a Venetian alchemist who had experimented with alternate timelines. The mirror didn't just reflect reality, it opened a window into a parallel one that was slowly falling apart. My reflection's world was deteriorating, objects disappearing, replaced by strange items, the sky taking on a sickly hue. And it all started after Barozzi restored the very same mirror. I dropped the pencil, feeling cold sweat trickling down my back. My reflection's face was gaunt eyes, hollow with terror. It wasn't just a coincidence. This mirror, this object, had somehow linked two realities, and now they were bleeding into each other. I was part of something much bigger, and I was just beginning to realize how deep the rabbit hole went. I stepped back, my mind racing. My reflection didn't just mimic my movements anymore, it was interacting with me, trying to communicate in ways that I couldn't fully understand. My throat went dry, and the basement felt like it had dropped 10 degrees in temperature. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more menacing. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the glass. It felt like my reflection was not just a passive mirror image, but a trapped version of me trying desperately to warn me about something. The scribbled message in the air seemed to confirm it. The mirror was more than just a reflective surface. It had the power to open doors to other realities, to other versions of ourselves. And that was just the beginning of the horror. I knew I had to find out more. I couldn't just leave it there, could I? I had to understand what was happening, what this mirror was really capable of. I threw myself into research, abandoning the restoration work and delving into obscure historical texts and academic databases, searching for any mention of Vincenzo Barozzi. What I found nearly stopped my heart. Barozzi wasn't just some obscure alchemist. He had been a minor nobleman, obsessed with alchemical experiments and theoretical mathematics, a contemporary of Nostradamus. According to one account from 1576, he had claimed to have created a window into the potential, a way to glimpse alternate versions of himself, to communicate with the person he could have been if different choices had been made. But after his experiments, Barozzi vanished. His laboratory was found empty, except for a large mirror, which the Venetian authorities confiscated. The more I uncovered, the more it seemed that my reflections' warnings were real. The mirror wasn't just an antique, it was a dangerous artifact, one that had been created with the intent of manipulating timelines, of allowing the viewer to interact with alternate realities. And now I was part of it. The lag between my movements and my reflection continued to decrease, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. By the third week, it had shrunk to just 10 seconds, then 5. My reflection no longer waited for me, it moved on its own, often staring at me with growing desperation. It wasn't just the time lag that was changing. The boundaries between our worlds, between me and my reflection, were starting to collapse entirely. I had already started to notice small changes in my environment, the kind of thing that made my heart race with fear. It began with something small. A coffee mug. I had dozed off at my workbench, my exhaustion finally catching up with me. When I woke up, I found my favorite ceramic coffee mug, a handmade piece from a local artist, replaced by another identical in shape, but with a completely different glaze pattern. The coffee inside was still warm, but it tasted wrong, bitter with a strange aftertaste. My heart nearly stopped in my chest as I stared at the unfamiliar mug, my hands shaking so badly that I had to set it down before I dropped it. I glanced around the workshop in a panic, looking for any other changes. And there they were. The calendar on the wall was now showing different appointments, ones I didn't recognize. A book sat on the shelf, one I had never seen before. And my tools, my precious restoration tools, were arranged in an order I would never have chosen. I turned to the mirror, heart pounding in my chest. My reflection stood there staring at me with an expression that could only be described as grim. It pointed to the mug, then made a sweeping gesture as if to say, "This is just the beginning." I stumbled back, unable to process what I was seeing. That night, I lay in bed listening to the house creak and groan around me, but then something changed. I began hearing sounds, deliberate sounds, scraping, tapping, the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving across my workshop floor. I couldn't bring myself to investigate. I was too afraid. The next morning, I went downstairs into the workshop, hoping it was just my imagination. But when I stepped into the basement, something was off. The mirror had been slightly repositioned. My tools were arranged in perfect order, an order I recognized as my own, but one that I hadn't left. And there, on the workbench, was a half-eaten sandwich. Tuna on rye, with pickles, my usual lunch, though I'd had soup the day before. Something had been using my workshop. The thought was enough to send a chill down my spine. My reflection, I realized, with growing horror, was no longer just an image in the mirror. It was a real, independent entity, and the boundary between its world and mine was thinning. The two realities were merging, and I was caught in the middle. I went outside, hoping to clear my head, but it only got worse. People on the street started giving me strange looks. The barista at my regular coffee shop hesitated before greeting me, her eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out who I was. And my neighbor? He backed away when I approached, claiming I had already borrowed his hedge trimmer that morning. I had no memory of it, but he was certain I was being replaced, overwritten. My reality was bleeding into another one, and I was trapped in the middle. When I returned to my workshop, my reflection was waiting for me. It pointed toward the frame of the mirror, frantically urging me to look closer. I cautiously approached, studying the intricate carvings on the frame that I had been restoring. And then, hidden among the vines and faces, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Symbols. Strange alchemical notations, mathematical formulas disguised as decorative elements. My reflection acted out a sequence of movements, breaking the mirror, shaking its head as if to say, "No, that's not the answer." It pointed again, this time, to a section of the frame I hadn't yet restored a part, where the wood had rotted away. As I examined it, I discovered a small hidden compartment. Inside, there was a tarnished silver key. The moment I touched it, the lights in the workshop flickered, and a chill ran through me. My reflection pressed its hands against the glass, its eyes wide with urgency. And for a brief moment, I felt a strange sensation, like someone had walked right through me. The temperature plummeted, my breath fogging in the cold air. Behind me, objects began to shift. By themselves, brushes rolling across the workbench, a chair sliding several inches to the left. The boundary between our worlds was collapsing, and I had no idea how to stop it. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the nearly invisible keyhole on the mirror's frame. The glass began to vibrate, a low humming sound filling the air, making my teeth ache. I could feel something shifting within the ancient wood as the mirror's surface rippled like water disturbed by a stone. My reflection distorted, stretching unnaturally before it snapped back into place. But this time, there was no lag, no delay. My reflection moved exactly as I did a perfect mirror image. For a moment, I thought it had worked. The reality had separated, and I had escaped the nightmare. But when I turned around, I saw something else. The workshop remained, but it was subtly altered. The walls were a different shade, a pale, sickly hue I didn't recognize. Equipment I had never seen before sat alongside my familiar tools. And in the center of the room, a half-finished restoration project I had no memory of starting was occupying the table. My stomach sank as the realization hit me. I hadn't separated the realities. I had merged them. I was no longer in my world or my reflection's world. We were now in a composite reality, a hybrid of both timelines. I studied my reflection again. This time, it mimicked my every movement. But as I leaned closer, I saw something else in my eyes, a haunted, knowing look that didn't belong to me. It was a new kind of awareness, one I didn't recognize, as though my reflection was no longer just a reflection, but a part of me, of something much larger. I wasn't sure if I had been pulled into a new dimension, or if I had created this mess myself. But I knew the mirror, the artifact, had been the catalyst. And now the two realities, mine and the reflections, were permanently intertwined. I continued to work in this new reality, navigating a world that was partly mine, partly foreign. Sometimes, in the reflective surfaces of windows, polished metal, or still water, I'd catch glimpses of movement not quite in sync with my own. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, I hear sounds from the basement. Footsteps, breathing the soft scrape of restoration tools against ancient wood. I've stopped investigating. I know what I'd find. Another version of myself from yet another timeline, staring into a Venetian mirror, his reflection just a second behind, just like mine had been. And somewhere, the cycle continues. As time continued to pass, I found myself growing more accustomed to this new existence. The boundaries between my world and the reflections world remained thin, but I had learned to navigate them, to coexist in this composite reality. It was unsettling at first, but there was a strange comfort in it. Perhaps it was the lingering belief that I could control my fate. After all, I had survived the merging. I thought maybe I could still maintain a semblance of my humanity. But the truth was, I wasn't the same person anymore. Neither was my reflection. We had become something else, something beyond the confines of our separate worlds. Days passed in a blur. The more I worked, the more I was aware of the subtle shifts, things out of place, a flicker in the glass, when I wasn't looking, a shadow that didn't belong. It felt like the universe itself was constantly recalibrating, realigning. Every so often, I'd catch glimpses of movements in the corner of my vision, things that weren't quite right. The air would become heavier, the hum of the workshop equipment louder, more intense. And my reflection, it had become less like an image in the glass and more like an entity, a living thing breathing on its own. It was on one of these nights that I realized the full extent of the transformation. I had been working late, restoring an old worn chair from the 17th century, the wood delicate and splintering with age. I could feel the weight of the hours settling in my mind, growing heavier with each stroke of the chisel. I hadn't noticed how dark the room had become until the flickering of the lights pulled me out of my trance. I turned to the mirror as I often did when I needed a moment of clarity. My reflection was waiting for me, as it always was, but this time, something was different. My reflection wasn't just mimicking me, it was observing me. It didn't look at my hands or my face or the tools I was using. No, it was staring into my eyes, deep into my eyes, as if it could see something I couldn't. For a moment, I couldn't look away. The air around me grew colder, and I felt a wave of nausea sweep over me. I stumbled back, my heartbeat quickening, but my reflection didn't follow. It stayed where it was staring at me, waiting. And then it did something it had never done before. It smiled, a smile. It wasn't the forced, mechanical grin I had come to expect. It was something else, something full of knowing, full of understanding. It wasn't my smile. It wasn't even human. My reflection's eyes flickered with something ancient, like it had seen more than I could ever comprehend. I could feel my mind slipping. The boundaries were crumbling again, and this time I didn't know if I could hold on. I wanted to leave the workshop, to run far away, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from that smile. And then, as if in answer to my terror, my reflection reached out with its hand, pressing its palm against the glass. The surface rippled slightly, like water disturbed by a stone. A sound, soft and subtle, began to hum in the background, the same hum I had heard when I first turned the key in the mirror's frame. But this time, the hum was louder, more insistent. My reflection's movements were slower, now deliberate, like it was waiting for something or someone. I realized then that I wasn't in control. I wasn't in charge of this reality, this composite world that I had thought I was navigating. No, the mirror, the entity within it, was guiding me now. It had always been guiding me. The hum intensified, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a crack form in the glass. Just a tiny fissure, barely noticeable, but there nonetheless. A crack between worlds. I knew in that moment that the process had started again. Whatever had caused the collapse before the cycle was repeating itself. And this time, I wasn't sure I could stop it, but I had to try. I pulled my eyes away from the glass, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. I stumbled toward the far side of the room, trying to distance myself from the reflection, from the reality I had become so deeply entangled in. As I turned, the room felt different. The weight of it had shifted. The walls, the air, even the light felt wrong. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to collect my thoughts. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped between two realities, two selves. I had to find a way to sever the connection, to pull away from the mirror, to escape from this nightmare. But how? I moved to the workbench and grabbed the first tool I could find, a delicate scalpel. It felt absurd, but it was all I had. As I moved toward the mirror, I hesitated. Was I really going to destroy it? Was I willing to risk it all, just to break the connection between us? My reflection moved behind me in perfect sync, watching my every move. The smile on its face had faded, replaced by a look of quiet resignation. It was waiting for me to make a choice, waiting for me to decide whether I was ready to sever the connection or whether I would let it continue, let it consume me. I raised the scalpel, my fingers shaking with the weight of the decision. And just as I was about to bring it down on the mirror, the hum stopped. Everything froze. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on me, but I couldn't make it. My body was moving on its own, but my mind was paralyzed, caught in the web of the reality I had helped create. I stood there, locked in place, my reflection still staring at me with that strange, knowing smile. In that moment, I understood. The mirror wasn't just a reflection of what I saw, it was a reflection of what I had become. It was a mirror not only of my face, but of my mind, my soul, my very existence. And the more I fought it, the more it pushed back, like it had already claimed me. I let the scalpel drop from my fingers, and then the world shifted again. The hum returned louder, now filling the room with a sound I couldn't ignore. My reflection no longer mirrored me. It was me. It had taken me in, absorbed me, and now I was part of it. Part of whatever was waiting on the other side of the glass. I could feel it. Now, feel myself slipping away, becoming one with the mirror. The boundaries between us had dissolved completely, and I knew in the deepest part of my mind that I would never be the same again. The workshop around me began to blur, like it was fading into the background of another world. I looked at my reflection one last time. It smiled at me, one final smile, as if it knew what was coming. And then everything went dark. I don't know where I am now. The mirror is still here, reflecting a world that is no longer mine. A world where the boundaries have completely dissolved. I can still see my reflection, still feel its presence, but it's not me anymore. It never was. It's something else, and somewhere in the depths of the glass, I can feel the cycle beginning again. I just don't know how to stop it. The renovations continued as planned, but in the back of my mind, The feeling lingered. The experience had rattled me more than I cared to admit, and despite the progress we made, there was a part of me that felt the building itself had become more than just a structure. It felt alive, as if the walls were watching, assessing, waiting for something. That same sense of unease followed me in the days that followed. It was as though something had shifted in me, something subtle, yet undeniable. I found myself drawn back to the hotel's corridors after hours, sneaking through the halls with nothing more than a flashlight and a vague sense of urgency. The hum had returned, faint, but persistent, vibrating beneath my feet. I couldn't help but wonder if I had somehow opened a door to something beyond this world, something that had been waiting for centuries. The more I thought about it, the more I questioned my own sanity. Was it just the stress, the long hours, the strange occurrences that had plagued me since I first stepped inside? Or had I, in my obsession with the renovation, unknowingly disturbed something ancient and powerful? In the quiet moments of the night, I often found myself staring at the blueprints, tracing the warped lines with my fingers. The geometric shapes, the twisted corridors. Was I making things better? Or was I only further unraveling the fabric of reality itself? I could still feel the weight of the hotel's presence pressing down on me, urging me to continue. But what if the building didn't want to be fixed? What if its twisted design was the key to something more? I didn't know if I could stop now. There was too much at stake, too much that had already been set in motion. As I walked through the hotel, now fully renovated, but still holding on to that eerie quality, I began to notice something. It was subtle, but it was there. The shadows seemed deeper, the air colder, and the once familiar corridors now felt different. I wasn't sure what had changed, but I knew it had. Somehow, I had crossed a line. The hotel was no longer just a building. It was a place with its own will, its own desires. And I was just another part of its story, a player in a game that was far older and more complex than I could have ever imagined. The workers had all left by then, and I was alone in the hotel, pacing the halls as the wind howled outside. The moonlight filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and sway like living creatures of their own. I had heard the rumors, the stories of those who had entered the hotel and never returned, of rooms that didn't exist and corridors that led to nowhere. But I had always dismissed them as fanciful tales, the kind people tell to spice up their lives. Now I wasn't so sure. I had done it, completed the renovations, restored the hotel to its former grandeur. But the hotel itself was a living entity, and I had unknowingly triggered its awakening. I could feel it in the air, in the silence between the rooms. It was waiting for something. I didn't know if it would ever let me leave. I didn't know if it ever let anyone leave. As the days stretched on, the feeling of being watched grew more intense. I could feel the hotel's gaze on me, following my every step. There were no longer any guests, but the building was far from empty. There was something else in the hotel now, something that had always been there, buried beneath the layers of time and forgotten memories. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. The footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder, as if someone or something was drawing nearer. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of bed, my hands trembling as I pointed the beam down the long corridor. Nothing, just shadows. I couldn't escape the feeling that the hotel was moving around me, shifting, changing. The walls seemed to bend, the corridors to stretch as if the building itself was alive, breathing, with the weight of its past. The hum in the sublevels had returned louder than ever. I could hear whispers in the walls, faint voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The longer I stayed, the more I realized that the hotel wasn't just a place, it was a bridge, a gateway to something far beyond our understanding. As I packed my things and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but glance at the hotel one last time. It stood there silent and imposing, as if it were daring me to look away. In my mind, I heard the faintest whisper, a voice too soft to understand, but too distinct to ignore. The door shut behind me with a heavy thud. I felt a strange emptiness, a void opening inside me. My fingers still tingled, as though the hotel had touched them one last time. I walked away, but I knew deep in my bones that the hotel would always be there waiting, watching, perhaps even calling me back. I don't know if I'll ever go back. The hotel may have released me, but a part of me knows that it hasn't truly let go. The shape of its presence, the weight of its existence lingers in the corners of my mind. And sometimes when the wind is right and the night is still, I swear I can hear the hum from miles away. Maybe the hotel never truly wanted me to leave, and maybe deep down, I never really wanted to. Unseen impact. Every time I worked on the watch, I felt the air thicken, as if I were about to enter another dimension, one that existed just beyond the edges of my perception. It was on the fourth day of my obsession that the anomalies escalated. I was adjusting the watch's small balance wheel when the lights in my workshop flickered and then went out entirely. I cursed under my breath and made my way to the fuse box, but before I could touch the switch, I heard the ticking, again, louder this time, more insistent. It came from the watch. I turned back and saw that the watch had moved. The once precise arrangement of tools on my workbench had been disturbed. The watch, now resting in a new position, was ticking away as though it had a life of its own. The hum had grown to a low, almost threatening vibration that reverberated through the floorboards. My heart pounded in my chest as a sudden chill swept through the room, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that something or someone was in the room with me. I turned the lights back on, but the unsettling silence that followed was far worse. The ticking continued. The only sound in the room was that rhythmic beat, a sound that felt more and more like a countdown. As I picked up the watch to inspect it once more, the ticking ceased, and in the sudden quiet, I thought I could hear a faint whisper, an inaudible murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if the watch was trying to speak to me, to communicate something I couldn't quite grasp. I tried to steady my trembling hands as I placed it back on the workbench, but before I could move, I saw something in the reflection of the glass. At first, I thought it was just the distortion of light or the flickering bulb overhead, but no. In the reflection of the glass, I saw another version of myself, standing beside me, mimicking my every move. But the reflection didn't match my actions. It tilted its head to one side and smiled in a way that was not my own expression. A cold, knowing smile. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a jar of tools. The figure in the reflection remained unchanged. My heart raced, but the figure didn't disappear. It was there, locked in place, as if waiting for me to make the next move. Then it spoke, not aloud, but in my mind, a voice that was mine, but not mine. It said only one word, stop. The air grew colder as the words echoed in my head, and I staggered back in horror. The watch continued, ticking in the background, its pulse growing faster, stronger, until it filled the room with an oppressive weight. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Suddenly everything went black. When I came to, the lights in the workshop were on again, but the watch was gone. The workbench was exactly as it had been before, as though nothing had happened. I was left standing there, staring at the empty space where the watch had once been, heart still racing, mind reeling. I looked around, half expecting to see some sign of its presence, some trace of the strange force that had taken hold of me. But there was nothing. I didn't know what had happened in those few minutes. Had it been a dream? Had it been some sort of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or the stress of the restoration? The only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't continue with the project. The watch, whatever it was, had broken something in me, something deep within the fabric of reality itself. I packed up the rest of the watch's parts and locked them away in the back of my desk drawer, where I would never touch them again. But the sensation of those eyes, the smile in the reflection, still lingered. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on, to return to the normal routine of my work. But every so often, I'd feel it again, just out of the corner of my eye. That same oppressive weight, that same sense of intrusion. It wasn't gone. It was still here in my workshop, in the space between moments. Even now, as I sit at my desk, working on new pieces, I feel the faint vibration in my fingertips, as though time itself is still watching me. The clock is still ticking somewhere just out of reach, and I know deep down it will come for me again.